Okay, well, let's finish up with the social aspects of World War II. Focusing mainly on things back in the U.S. in the home front. Let's wrap this thing up. Bring it in for a landing. Uh, so I had been talking about the women, Rosie the Riveter, their contributions to the war production. Very sizable, very important, but possibly exaggerated in common mythology. Right? But women are certainly seeing a lot of changing roles during this war. One example of this uh, are the WASPs. That's the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, if I recall. Everyone just calls them WASPs. These are young women who, some of them were probably already pilots prior to war. Some have signed up and they go through flight training. A lot of them were working right here in Texas. A lot of them were based at a place called Avenger, or trained at a place called Avenger Field out near Sweetwater, if I recall. Uh, Basically, what these are ferry pilots. Okay, if we're going to build hundreds of thousands of airplanes, you got to get them from the factory to the air bases. Okay, so the WASPs train to do this. Okay, uh, they can pick up planes, they can ferry them around to from point A to point B. This frees up male pilots who then maybe can be sent to the front. I think WASPs also sometimes tow target tugs for aerial gunnery training, things like that. But their main role was to ferry airplanes around. Okay? If you're building a plane in Dallas or Fort Worth or San Diego, and you need to get them to an air base somewhere. Now, a lot of the training air bases were in Texas, by the way. A lot of them down around San Antonio. Why? Well, there's no mountains to fly into. There's very little blizzards, snow, bad weather. So Texas was seen as a good place for training pilots. So anyway, these ladies fly airplanes all over the place. It's a really exciting, interesting story. But we're talking a fairly small number of people. It's probably several hundred at any one time. Okay? And they're not considered part of the military. If one of these girls is killed in a plane crash, sometimes the other pilots have to take up a collection to send the body home. Okay? It's kind of sad. Now, many years later, Congress retroactively gave veteran status to the WASPs who would qualify as veterans. Okay? Some of their archives are up at Texas Women's University, TWU, in Dent. So this is a subject you're interested in. You have to do a research paper. You might look into that. So female aviators, WASPs. Okay? All right. They had a caricature that was designed by the Walt Disney Company. Okay? It was like on their jackets and stuff. All right. Also, women in the Army. Okay? The WACs. That's the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Later, they dropped the auxiliary and just call them the Women's Army Corps. And a lot of these jobs are, steno jobs, typist pools, clerk jobs. Remember, we're talking about a time when there's no personal computers. There's not even mainframes. I mean, there's a few computers in the whole country, and they're all working on the Manhattan Project. Everything's got to be typed, on a typewriter. Requisitions, movement orders. And so the wax did a lot of this kind of work. Because traditionally, that was something a lot of women knew how to type or how to take shorthand. Uh, so a lot of them joined the army, and this would once again meant new male clerks could then go do something that like in combat or closer to front lines. Now, uh, this young lady right here is in the Army Air Force. You can tell by the shoulder patch. Judging from the microphone here, I'm guessing she's probably like an air traffic controller at an air base. Just speculating. Okay. Uh, these ladies up here appear to be teletype operators, which is it's like a typewriter that you type into and it sends to typing to a teletype operator somewhere else in the country. Okay, it's how they used to do things before email. And then, of course, nurses. I don't have any pictures of nurses here, but the medical corps had many, many female nurses, some of which a handful actually were killed during the war. They would be close to the front lines, and a stray artillery shell might get them. Small numbers, but it did happen. So women are active in the military. You have the WASPs, which technically wasn't part of the military, although they were working for the military. The WACs. The Navy also had a female component, the Waves. And so there's a lot of women serving their country in this regard. And so this is an example, once again, of changing roles of women. Now, some of this working in industry had gone on during World War I too, but it was really noticeable in World War II. What else have I got here? Ah, yes. So here's a Rosie the Riveter, although she's actually using a drill. And I swear to goodness, my dad had a drill that looked exactly like that. And he used to say that he bought it war surplus. And I'd give anything to know where it is right now. Because it looked just like that thing. This woman's working on dive bombers at the Vultee plant in Tennessee, if I recall, is what the caption said. And what's different about her? Well, A, she's a woman. B, if you hadn't figured it out, she's black. Okay? Now, did black Americans want these jobs, these industrial jobs that paid pretty well? Yes, they did. Okay? A lot of black Americans are still living in the South, farming, that sort of thing. Now, a lot of them had started to migrate during the First World War. That's something called the Great Migration, which is when a lot of the Southern blacks started moving north into places like Chicago and New York. So this kind of started around World War I, although we didn't talk about it. But it's in World War II, the blacks would like these jobs. And Roosevelt had stipulated if you're going to take defense money, you had to hire minorities. Okay, there was an executive order about this. Okay, and maybe small numbers, but it did happen. All right. This caused some friction, of course, with some folks who didn't want to work in a desegregated environment. Others did care, of course. Right. So here's like I said, she's not really a riveter because she's drilling holes, but get the idea. African Americans would like to have these jobs, and they're fighting for them. Okay? Which brings me up to the Double V campaign. Now, these people are civil defense wardens. That's what the little CD on the sleeves are. You'll notice that there's a helmet hanging on the chair. Okay. So there was lots of civil defense volunteers during the war. What if the Germans launched an air raid on the United States? Well, that would be tricky because there's no German air bases within range of the United States. But we don't know that at the beginning of the war, where they seized an island of the Caribbean, maybe took one of those French islands since they've defeated the French. Or the Japanese, you could launch a carrier attack against the West Coast. So communities would have civil defense wardens. Okay? And so what we see is black Americans want to use the opportunity of World War II to advance the civil rights agenda. They called it the Double V campaign. So Winston Churchill used to flash the V. V for victory. It wasn't a peace sign back then. It meant V for victory. We want victory over Hitler. All right? And this became kind of a catchphrase, V for victory. So black Americans were running what they called the Double V campaign, victory overseas and victory at home. Okay? Basically, to simplify it and put it in a nutshell, what they're thinking is we will show that we are loyal Americans and do our part, even though we're treated as second-class citizens in most cases. All right? When the chips are down, we're still Americans, and we're going to pull our share of the weight. But we're going to expect something out of this. We expect some kind of elevation of status in return. So victory at home and victory overseas, the Double V campaign. And this is kind of like a will carry over into the civil rights movement of the 1950s. Okay? We're willing to fight and die for this country. We don't want to come home to a Jim Crow society. Now, the Army is still segregated in World War II. Black units were usually labor units. They drove trucks, they unloaded ships, they loaded trucks, they moved goods around, quartermasters, mostly in support roles. There were, however, some black combat units. There was an entire black division as kind of a descendant of the old Buffalo Soldiers. They served in Italy. I believe it was the 92nd Division. I'm pulling that off the top of my head. There were, a few black combat units, but the vast majority of black Americans in the military were serving in segregated units, mostly doing physical labor. Okay? The Navy was a little different. You can't segregate a ship per se, okay? Because it's only a ship, but blacks in the Navy usually served as mess attendants, cooks, that kind of thing. They normally weren't given combat roles. Okay? This is the way things were at this time. Now, there are some notable exceptions, the most famous of which are these guys. These are the Tuskegee Airmen. Okay? These are this was a social experiment project in some way. Eleanor Roosevelt was backing this, but there were blacks who said, well, we want to be pilots. And I'll be honest, a lot of people said, oh, they can't be pilots. They don't have the intellect. Don't kill me. I'm just a messenger. This is what some people were saying at the time. Well, of course, blacks can be pilots. You just have to train them. Okay. And so this black unit was put together of pilots. They trained at Tuskegee, the old school that the Tuskegee Institute down in that city. And they actually had a pretty good combat record. They went over. They fought in Italy. And there was a movie out about them about a year or two ago, but I understand it's not very good. Okay? But it's a classic story. Okay. Now, one reason they're good is if you're only going to, if this is like an experimental unit, and the white officers who are against this are convinced that this will never work, so they're trying to limit the numbers. So you're only going to let a limited number of people become pilots. Well, so you get the cream of the crop. 10 or 15,000 people apply. I'm just making up a number, and you get to pick, a few dozen. So of course you get the people who are most capable. Whereas maybe in some white combat units, it's like, hey, you got a pulse, put them in. So the Tuskegee Airmen turned out to have a really good combat record, partially because they probably had something they were trying to prove. Okay? And that can really motivate somebody sometimes to prove that they're just as good as the people who say they're not good. That didn't come out very well, but you know what I'm saying. Okay. Now, I love the Tuskegee Airmen story. I actually met one of these guys a few years ago. It was really cool. I'm almost kind of tired of it. Not that I don't think it's a great story, but people who don't know anything about World War II latch on to the Tuskegee Airmen and use this as their example. And they completely overlooked other black combat groups like the 761st Tank Battalion, I believe was their designation. I think a guy named Jackie Robinson was in it, who later went on to play baseball. So the contributions of other black combat units have been kind of overshadowed by the Tuskegee Airmen, which doesn't mean the Tuskegee Airmen are not a great story. It just means that a lot of historians teaching stuff don't know anything about the other peoples. They just keep going back to the Tuskegee Airmen well. Right. Gosh, I'm almost out of time. I'm going to get this last slide in. Japanese soldiers, Americans of Japanese descent, to be more accurate. They might have something to prove too, or want to prove that they're loyal Americans. Some of them will join the Army. They don't get sent to the Pacific, because can you imagine this could cause problems to have people who look Japanese in American uniforms walking around on the battlefield. Good way to get shot by your own side. Or have the Japanese see you as a traitor. So the Japanese Americans, they've known as Nisais, go to Italy, where they take great glee in killing Germans at a prodigious rate. It's a very highly decorated unit. I have like 15 seconds left. I'm going to mention the Navajo Code Talkers. I don't have a slide of them. These are Navajo Indians who go into the Marine Corps and speak in Navajo language code because there's no Japanese who speak Navajo. Gotta run. 15 minutes is up. Have a good day.